Um, are we ready for this? Before we get started, I just have to say that we have a special person among us. Tom Edgerton finished second in his age group in the mini. And that's pretty cool, guys. I won't tell the age group. But I'm just proud of him. So, we're at verse 29 of chapter 15. Let me think. Next week we don't have class. Next week I will be at both a graduation, a play, and a science fair project all in one evening. So my intention is to just let somebody else take me. And I'm just hoping that the dress for each one is exactly the same. That's all, it's like, and the play is really short, I was told. But I don't know what that means for fifth graders. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. So if you think of me, you can pray for me. It'll be fine, I'm sure. It'll be fun. Well, let's get going. I don't have any news. Let's see. Let me pray for us and then we'll get right into it. Lord, thank you so much for this evening, the opportunity to look into your word. And again, I just thank you that we have the truth about your son's life, and that we can read it and study it and be changed by it. I pray that will happen tonight, that we will be changed by what we see in your word. So I pray these things, thanking you for the goodness that we have in our lives, Lord. I thank you so much. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Alrighty, let me see. Where should I start reading? Well, last week and just so you know, I only have notes through verse, 41? That's okay with everybody. If we get to 41, we're doing good, I think, tonight. So let's see. I'll start reading it. Well, I'll just start at 24, but then we'll start talking at 20. Then the soldiers nailed him to the cross, and they divided his clothes and threw dice to decide who would get each piece. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him, and a sign announced the charge against him. It read, "King of the Jews," the King of the Jews. And 2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. "Ha! Look at you now," they yelled at him. "You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Well, then save yourself and come down from the cross." The leading priests and teachers of the religious law also mocked Jesus. "He saved others," they scoffed, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see it and believe him." Even the men who were crucified with Jesus ridiculed him. And at noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?" And some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. And one of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a reed stick so he could drink. "Wait," he said, "let's see whether Elijah comes to take him down." Then Jesus uttered another loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he had died, he exclaimed, "This man truly was the Son of God." And some women were there, watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph, and Salome. And they'd been followers of Jesus and had cared for him while he was in Galilee, and many other women who had come with him to Jerusalem were also there. Okay, we'll stop. That's as far as I brought my notes. Okay, so if we get that far, we're going home. Okay, but I just want to say a couple things. Did you notice there's no verse 28? There's no verse 28. Oh, I didn't read one. You may have a 28 in your text, but that is an addition. It's, how do I say it? It's the verse that's in some later texts is, it says, and the scripture was fulfilled that said, and then let's see, he was counted among those who were rebels, which is from Isaiah 53:12. Is that it? Yeah, there it is. And now, if you look at the Gospel of Luke in chapter 22, where we're getting the same story, in verse 12, you're going to find, oh, wait, that's Luke. Is it 37? It is. You're right. Where did I see? Oh, Isaiah 53:12. That's where it came from. Okay, but this verse is there. And what we find in later documents of Mark, much later, is the addition of this verse that they've taken from Luke to make them work together. And somebody did it farther along. It's in all of the reliable documents of Luke, okay? So this verse is clearly in Luke, talking about the fact that there's a prophecy related to Jesus being hung on the cross between two rebels. But it's not in Mark. And so they're wise here to leave it out. But just so you know, that the reason, and we have to remember that early on when people were writing the Gospels, they weren't thinking they were writing the Bible. They were just thinking they were telling the story so that people would have the story, so it would be permanent, and that people would have the truth and a picture of it. And it's not until much later when the canon was called the New Testament or the Bible, and this is much later. Then it becomes to us the Bible. But in the beginning, the guys who were copying it, the copyists were just making copies so that it would make sense to the people that they were making the copies for. And it makes perfect sense that if they had Luke and they had Mark and they're looking at them and they're almost the same and they see this statement in Luke and it makes a lot of sense to just, as they're copying Mark, just to stick it in there. But we're concerned now that we have so many copies of the various books of the New Testament, we're concerned about what the original writers wrote. And though it doesn't change it, this one doesn't, it's just not there. So you take it for what it's worth. It's true, but it wasn't in Mark. Mark wasn't thinking about it, and Peter wasn't thinking about it. And I just want to say that as we get into this next section, and this is an important point, that as this next section, Peter was not a witness to any of this. He's off hiding. So everything that we're going to get here about what's happening to Jesus as he's on the cross, he gets from somebody who was present or somebody who talked to somebody who was present. And then Mark, who gets his information from Peter, he's working with the way that Peter has told the story. And it's very interesting from this point on, every single event is highly dramatic. And there's sort of general statements about this happened or that happened, and we do get some quotes, but for the most part, they're really dramatic moments right up until what I finished reading. And so I want you to think about this for a minute. Mark has had Peter telling the story. He may have heard some other people. He wouldn't have read because there was no other narrative book that they were working from. But he has to decide what he's going to put in his story. And so he picks very specific things because they all have two meanings. They have the meaning of the fact of what happened, and they have a theological point. And so we'll have to talk about both of those. But that's what's going on in this bit as we get into this. He's very careful. And again, he's not telling the story of an eyewitness. He's telling the story of somebody who could have been an eyewitness, but had to find out from other people what happened. Does this make sense? Am I making sense here? So they're sort of a double thing. There's so much irony in what's going on here, and it would have said a lot to the first readers as they read it that says, this happened, oh my goodness, and it means this. This happened and it means this. So, because if you think about it, think about the differences between Mark's gospel and Luke and John and Matthew. You know, there's a lot of differences. Mark's is shorter because he's only giving us bare minimums to make theological points. So am I saying, I don't want to carry this too far. But anyway, okay, the first thing is the people passing by shouted abuse, is what it says. And I'll just say a couple in this verse, 29 and 30, together, we're going to get how quickly the derision of the leaders towards Jesus had passed on to the people passing by. That's literally what it says. The people passing by shouted abuse. Now we got to go, okay, why are people passing by? Well, it's the road into Jerusalem, yes, but it's not just any old what? Any old weekend. Yeah, there it is. By the way, that's good that you have that highlighted that way, Jeff. In normal speak, in most of Mark, and actually in most of the Gospels, every time we get a group of people, they're called the crowd. And this is the one place where they're not called the crowd, because the crowd is, that word oxlos, it always means a gathering of people that you can't trust, okay? You can't trust them. They can be very fickle. They can be with you and against you. And he just says, he's not talking about that. He's not going to use that term because we could go, well, are they for him or against him? Because of the way the word is usually used. And these ones are completely, there's no question what these people are. They are against him, the ones who are passing by. And they're what? They're people going into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover at the temple at the biggest celebratory week of the year. And as we're going to see in a minute, they have heard that Jesus said something crazy about what? The temple. And we're going to see that in a minute. And it says they're wagging. I love that word. The best translation of shaking is wagging. And it's a word that just means like a dog's tail or to wag your like this. You know, it's exactly what it means to wag your head. They're both. Oh, great! There it is. They railed him, wagging the heads. That's exactly what it is. And so you can. And why are they doing this? Because they think Jesus is getting exactly what he deserves. And we'll see why in a minute. But this is abuse. There's no question that the word had gotten out that this guy deserves to be crucified. Now think about it a minute. Just last weekend, Jesus came into Jerusalem, and a huge crowd did what? They laid their blankets on the ground to let his donkey come in front of them. They praised him as what? The blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He was the apple of everybody's eye last weekend. Now the crowd has gotten bigger, and somehow the news has gotten out. That word, it says ha. That's exactly that's the best. It's the only place in the New Testament that word is used in the Greek. And it's an odd word. It's hard to really translate it. There's another word that, there we go, right there. You see it? It's that, it's a hard word to say. It's 3 vowels. Now, there's another word that is used. There's an iota in there. I don't know, you probably don't have that one, do you? That's okay, Jeff. Don't worry about it. But it's a 4-letter word that's just a little different than that one, that's everywhere, and it's a word of derision. Now this one, since it's no place else to see what it actually means, the best we can come up with is the best the scholars have come up with is ha. Yeah, ha. And that's, we don't do that very often. Maybe, I don't know that I've ever gone, ha, you're getting what you look at you. But you know what I'm saying? This is like a really hard thing. Now, not everybody, they weren't like chanting this, but they were yelling stuff, and that's true that they were what? Raising their voices. It says, ha, look at you now, they yelled at him. In other words, what did he say? They said, you said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Where are they going? They're going to the temple. Why are they going to the temple? Because it's the most important building in the world. It's God's house. It's the place where we get our sins forgiven. It's the most iconic structure in all of history. And you said you're going to tear it down and rebuild it in 3 days? Now, this would imply, when they say you're going to destroy the temple, first off, you don't talk that way about the temple. Nobody talks that way, that we're going to tear it down. Look at you for saying that. Of course you're going to get this. And then they say, and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days? Now, the point is this. Anybody who can tear down the temple personally and then rebuild it in 3 days has what? Supernatural powers. That's what they're claiming, isn't it? They're claiming they can do something that no human being can do. And if he's made this public statement about it, then he's either what? Crazy? Or he's evil? Or he's got power to do it. There's only three things you can, those are all pretty much the only things you can say about it. And so they're saying, well then, save yourself. If you can rebuild the temple in 3 days, my bet is that you can easily, what? Save yourself and come down off that cross. You can get down off the cross. That's way easier than rebuilding the temple in 3 days. And so this is like rubbing it in. Now, first off, the quote is wrong. They're misquoting Jesus. He never said that he would tear it down and rebuild it in 3 days. He said something close to that, but this is how it's being reported. Because why? Because the fastest way to turn people, the general population, against Jesus is to get him to claim that he's the Messiah, and he's going to do what? Tear down the temple. Because nobody sees the Messiah in those terms. The other thing is, nobody sees the Messiah in terms of somebody who would get crucified or get overrun by the Romans in any manner. And this is just the beginning. Now we've had the religious leaders, and now we have the people who are coming, the Jewish population that's coming into town. I don't know what it was. I know that crucifixion was a horrible thing. It's a horrible thing. But these people were so convinced of Jesus' dark side, I suppose, and craziness, that they wanted to see him dead. They didn't care that he was dead. This whole section, is that thing just doing that to you? It's just doing that? Man, you just don't know how much I lean on it. Can you kick it? I don't know. You can't even pound on the top of it. I don't think it has a top. Sorry. He's going to try to fix it. Does this make sense? Does everybody see? Now what's happening is Mark is showing how isolated Jesus is. It's one thing to be isolated from people. His disciples have left him. That's bad. Now then the religious leaders have left him and isolated him. And now the general population coming into town, which is exactly the opposite of what he felt when he came into town. It's exactly the opposite of the thing that he experienced. This is where Mark is taking us. He's going to take us all the way through till Jesus is completely alone. Let me see, what's the next verse? See, I can't, you lean on Jeff so much here. Let's see. Oh, yes, and then it goes in verse 31. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything here. Oh, yeah, I want to say this. When it says, well then, save yourself and come down off the cross, this is important for this whole passage because the word saved, and you may remember this from the past, it means generally in the Greek to heal yourself. And they're saying heal yourself and save yourself. It means two things at once. That's why when we get this, when it says that the leading priests and the teachers of the religious law also mocked Jesus, and they say, he saved others, they scoffed. Now this is an admission, boom, that he did heal people. We're almost sure that they meant by that word that they're not talking about that he saved people, like from what? Well, he healed people everywhere. And they're not arguing about whether or not he healed anybody. They know that he did. They're just minimizing that ability because he can't take care of himself. There's an old Jewish proverb that everybody knew at the time, and it essentially said this: before you step to save anyone else, take care of yourself. And it's sort of like, it's not as common as like, like the sayings like a penny saved is a penny earned, or, you know what I mean, or like a stitch in time saves nine, that kind of thing. Well, they had a common phrase that said, before you help someone else, so take care of someone else, take care of yourself first, then you can help them better, that kind of thing. This is a common thing. Now, we don't know whether like they're all thinking, wow, this is just like that old saying that Grandma used to say all the time. You need to take care of yourself first. But it does, whoa, hey. Thank you. We're a section ahead now. And you put the next verses up. Yay, the leading priest in this mock Jesus, he saved others. Yeah, they're saying, oh yeah, he could heal people, okay. But he can't help himself. He can't help himself. That makes him what? Really foolish, because he's supposed to do what? Take care. Look, it's time for him to take care of himself, and he can't take care of anybody. Now, this is highly theological. The truth is, Jesus could have saved himself. He could have healed himself. In fact, there's something miraculous about the fact that when he shows up 3 days later, that he doesn't look like he just got whipped to death. And it's the only things that are left are the holes in his hands and feet and side. And I went to a lecture, and we'll talk about it later when we get to that point, but I went to a lecture one time that was just about what kind of wounds he still had. An hour and a half of it was up at Anderson, and it was all about the scars, and the scars he did not have. So he could have healed himself. He could have. He could have saved himself. By the way, in this statement, when the first church readers would have read this, and it said he saved others, but he can't save himself, and they all know the end of the story, they now know that every possible meaning of that word sozo, of saving, is now applicable to what Jesus did for us. Body healing. He saves us from the dangers of the darkness. Saves us what? Into an eternity with God. If you look up the word, it's got, and this is not an appropriate thing to do necessarily with Greek, to take every possible definition of a word and apply it to something. But this one, you can. This one you can, because every possible way to think about saving in the Greek, Jesus did for us. And he did not save himself so that he could what? Save us. And this is what Mark wants us to. He wants us to hear that the leading priests and the scribes, the people who knew the scripture better than anybody else, they missed it so far that they ridiculed him on the cross about his ability to save people. They did not see his miraculous healings or any of those other things as signs that maybe they ought to pay attention to him. In fact, I'm sure I've told you that the word that gives us signs, the word that tells us, they always say, give us a sign. That word simply is a word that means a miraculous thing that tells us we need to listen to what you say. This is what they're, and then they do it right here again. They say, oh, this is great. He can't save himself. And then they say, let this Messiah, the King of Israel. Now that's like to all Jews reading this, they're going to go, oh my goodness. Because that phrase, the Messiah, the King of Israel, is the official way that Jews talked about the Messiah. Pilate called them Judeans, and he said, this is the King of the Jews. They did not refer to themselves as Judeans. They referred to themselves as Israelites, children of Israel. Okay? And so the official name, if you went to the synagogue and they're talking about the Messiah, they would have said, the Messiah, the King of Israel. These guys who wanted him dead because they did not believe he was the Messiah, they call him by their true official name, which is so ironic. The only time that he is called by the official name of Judaism at the time is right here, when these guys are after him. And they say, come down from the cross. They're saying, in other words, save yourself. And then we get this ugly, ugly, pious statement where they say, so we can see and believe him. Now, in the past, they'd ask for a miraculous sign so they could what? Believe in him. Because the signs said, and again, this is always true, especially if you go back and look at the prophets, they had the ones that did miraculous things, the reason they did miraculous things was so that people would pay attention to what they said. And that's the same thing here. These guys are saying, show us something that proves that you have power from God so that we'll believe you. And that's what they said before. And Jesus said, I'm not going to do anything like that. No, I'm not going to do that, because what you're going to say is what you said before when you saw me doing this stuff. If you see me do something miraculous, you're just going to say I'm doing it by the power of the devil. That's what you're going to say. You're not going to believe in me no matter what. And then they say this, come on down from the cross so we can see it and believe it. It's exactly the same sort of thing. Do you think there is a chance that if Jesus had come down off the cross when they said, come down off that cross, that they'd have got down on their knees and bowed down and worshiped him as the Messiah? There's not a chance. They would have said, look what the devil is up to. Look what the devil, and I am fully convinced that Jesus was not tempted to do this at the time. But it's just so creepy to think that they would. These are the religious leaders. And can you imagine when they're mocking him in this way, what it makes the people that are around them coming in think when they see these guys? These are big shots. And they're saying these terrible things to Jesus. And it makes everybody else go, huh, it must be okay to jump on board and make fun of this guy, whoever he is. Because remember, most of the people coming into town probably didn't know who he was. And he's got a sign over him that says what? King of the Jews. King of the Jews. Next sentence is interesting. It says, even the men who were crucified with him, with Jesus, ridiculed him. We know from another gospel that one of them repented of this attitude. Mark does not talk about that. He just talks about the fact that the two men on either side of Jesus ridiculed him. You would have thought, I mean, we're pretty sure they were a part of a rebellion. They were being crucified probably because they were in a plot that ended up murdering somebody trying to overthrow the Roman government. You would have thought that their hearts would have naturally been inclined to this man who's being crucified as king, claiming to be king of the Jews, because claiming to be king of the Jews is about as anti-Roman as you can get. You'd have thought that they'd have both gone, well, we didn't really agree with where he was headed, but at least he was on our side. You see what I'm saying? That there would have been a natural affinity, if you will, between what they were suffering and what he was suffering. They were all dying together for the same thing, that they hated the Romans and that they wanted to change the world pro-Israel. But this shows how alone Jesus is. The religious leaders have turned on him. The people have turned on him. And even the two that might have had some affinity for him, they have turned against him. Jesus is completely alone in this moment. There's nobody there that's even saying, I'm sorry this is happening. We thought you were a great guy. Nobody. That's why he says it this way. Now, we don't know if there were other people crucified besides the two on either side. Remember, I talked about that last week, how that was a picture of something. But whatever it is, we know that nobody said anything. Jesus in Mark has not spoken. He's silent. Don't for a minute think he's silent because he is in Mark, because he is incapable. He's silent in all of this mocking because he is being obedient to that cup that he knew he'd been given. And so he's not going to say anything. Does this make sense? This stuff is all... I just got to say, you don't want to... how long have we been talking about the crucifixion? Like a month? I've been thinking, I'm spending a lot of time thinking about this. It wears me out. Why? Because I know why he went to the cross. It was for us. His silence is the greatest act. His silence and his refusal to do anything, to respond to these people as they say these things, is the greatest act of love in all of history. By the way, they said he saved others, but he can't save himself. That was not true. But when they said, let this Messiah, the King of Israel, this is the first time that anybody has actually called him what he officially should have been called. So the people who were out to kill him the most are the people who make the greatest statement about his identity. More irony. Mark is big on this. Who'd have thunk it? That the chief priests and the scribes would be the people who actually call him to his face by the name that he deserved. The King of Israel. He's not just the King of the Jews, he's the King of Israel. I just think that's powerful. Yeah, I guess we can go on. What's it? Okay, at noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. Okay, we just got to stop right there. Darkness in the Old Testament is always a sign of judgment. The first thing of darkness happens in the book of Exodus, when it's one of the plagues. Then the Lord said to Moses, lift your hand toward heaven, and the land of Egypt will be covered with a darkness so thick you can feel it. So Moses lifted his hand to the sky, and a deep darkness covered the entire land of Egypt for 3 days. During all that time, the people could not see each other, and no one moved. But there was light as usual where the people of Israel lived. Now, the Greek of this sentence was where it says there's darkness over the whole land. The word there is gune, and it can mean the earth. It can mean the earth, or it can mean just a section of land, okay? Because they didn't think of the earth as an orb. They thought of it as flat. And so here's my bet, that it only got dark like that. Oh, I love that when he puts that in. Yeah, it's up there where it says the whole land or the whole earth. A lot of your older translations will say the whole earth, like the whole earth felt the darkness. Now, clearly it wasn't a darkness like the darkness in the Egyptian thing, but the notion of darkness is always about judgment. It's always about judgment. And so when the earth goes dark, when Jesus is on the cross, there's a couple of ideas about it. One is that God is making a statement about judgment, and all the Jews should have realized that because they knew about it. And there's others. Jesus himself said a couple of times that at the end of the whole thing, there's going to be darkness at noon, and the sun's going to be blotted out and stuff like that. And so darkness is always associated with the coming judgment of God. And if there was ever a time for God to make a statement about what's happening right now and to make things dark because there needed to be a judgment, it's right here. Because look what mankind was doing to his son. There's that. I think it just got dark where they were, like in the area of the Jewish people. I don't think that Rome went dark for 3 days. If it had, I guarantee you it would have shown up in the history books somewhere that they had, because we always are running into these grand celestial images of things that happen in the sky that portend something that happened in Rome or Greece and stuff like that. And also another thing, people made the assumption that any kind of thing that happened in the sky, like an eclipse or some kind of strange lightning thing or anything like that, was the gods letting you know something was up. And so if it goes completely dark from noon to 3 o'clock, even if it's just darkness like night, everybody's going to be thinking, what's going on? What's going on? I will tell you this. In the last 2 centuries, people have tried in every imaginable way to prove that this was some sort of natural occurring thing. I'll just tell you what they are. One is that they had a full eclipse. Now, I'm just going to say that the Jews have kept great records of when the Passover happens, and we know that no year of the Passover, first off, the Passover cannot happen on a full moon. I'm just putting it out there, okay? And secondly, we also know that there was no moon big enough at the time of the Passover, if we go for an 8-year, 10-year period on either side of where we think the crucifixion might have happened, where there was a Passover with a full moon or enough of a moon that eclipse would turn everything dark for 3 hours. Okay, so we know that the thing that was an eclipse, and it just got dark for a little while, and they stretched it to 3 hours. That's probably not true. Other people say that it was a sandstorm, and that a sandstorm just happened to blow in while Jesus was on the cross, and nobody could see anything, and it was just dark. Now, I'm just going to tell you, if a sandstorm had blown in when Jesus was on the cross, you know what we would have been told? At about 12 o'clock, or about the second watch, a sandstorm blew in. Because the problem wouldn't be darkness, it'd be sand. And so they wouldn't have reported it as darkness. They would have reported it as a sandstorm, okay? I'm just saying, so it's not a sand. And I have to tell you, I don't know what a sirocco is. I didn't look it up. But other people said it was a sirocco with its heavy, dark clouds and rain. I don't know, I was just lazy. I didn't look it up. But it must be some kind of storm, heavy storm that they have. It could have rained then and gotten dark. Have you ever seen any of those movies where they show Jesus on the cross and it's always raining and dark? Yeah, that's what they're getting that from. But I don't know. what I do know is that God had every reason. Now listen, you know that the Bible tells us, Romans tells us, that and this is an odd statement, I think, that it says that the creation groans to see the revelation of mankind, which is essentially saying, seeing us as God created us to be. Creation groans in anticipation, in like birth pains. And this is a really interesting image that somehow the entire creation, which now has to represent God in the world, as opposed to God being present. God isn't present, so the only thing left is his creation to tell us about him. And it doesn't want to tell us about God because it doesn't tell us very much about him. And it's groaning for the day that this is all over with and we're all revealed as we are supposed to be, as the sons and daughters of God. And then it can get back to just being the background of life. And it can groan in childbirth. Now, I don't know. It's a beautiful image, and it's probably not true, but I'm just saying if the natural world has some sort of being to it, which would fit in with the way that ancient people thought about the world anyway, that it was a large living structure. You knew that they thought that the world was actually, the Jews, the Kabbalistic Jews actually believed that the whole of the world was actually a big dude, a guy. And we were just a part of a system that was a person. I don't need to tell you more about it, but they still had imagery that related to this person having a relationship that was like a human. It would make sense to me that something in that could say if the earth can groan because it's not happy about the condition of the world, it can have enough knowledge to go dark on us when it sees what we're doing to its creator. Now, I know that's kind of out there. But God can make the creation dark because he's judging it. And the creation can also possibly make itself dark because its heart is broken, because it sees what it's doing to the one that made it. 3 hours, it's a long time of darkness. That's all we get about it. I mean, I gave you a lot about it, but I talked a long time about it. But it's just important that Mark tells us this happened. Why? Because this is a sign in the stratosphere that something huge is happening. Pay attention. And when the first readers read it went dark, the sun darkened for 3 hours when Jesus was on the cross, we better pay attention. That make sense? Yeah. This is a good time to take a break. I think I'm not wearing you out, am I? I'm just a little jacked up. I've been living in this for quite a while. So, okay, let's take 5 minutes. We'll come back. Yeah, we're pretty close to the end of this book.
So we're not going to help hit the Chelsea Clinton administration.
Oh yeah, I said that we'd be in Mark until the second Chelsea Clinton administration. That is kind of funny that I said that, isn't it? Yeah, there was something going on tonight that I thought everybody would want to get home for, but I can't remember what it was. There was something weird that was going on. I think it was the AKC frisbee dog catching contest or something. I looked it up, but I can't remember exactly what it was. There's always something on Tuesday night going on that's worth missing my class over. Yeah. Well, I guess we can go ahead. Can we go ahead? We are at this verse. I'm going to do 34 because there's a lot to say about this. And then I think that'll be enough for tonight. This verse has really created a lot of dissonance for Christians. So then at 3 o'clock, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me or forsaken me? The first thing, at 3 o'clock, so this is when the darkness lifts. The darkness lifts, and Jesus has not spoken at all. He's not been recorded as saying anything. And Mark only records this as all he says. Now, I know that there are all these stages of the cross, and other books give us other things that he says. Mark only gives us this. I just want you to know that almost every secular source about crucifixion calls it the loudest, most profane of all deaths. They say that people on the crosses scream and yell in agony, curse their tormentors, and they die by gradually weakening. That at the very beginning they are really loud and it's awful. And then the longer they hang, the weaker they get. We don't get this at all from Jesus. When he says at 3 o'clock, he's been on the cross at least 3 hours. And remember these times, and 3 o'clock is about it, because these are called, in the original language, it's a watch, the first watch, second watch, third watch. So they're not exact times. But it says, and he called out in a loud voice. It's a shouted with great force. That is, oh yeah, there it is. He implored, that's a good way to say it, implored with a voice great, or that megala is the last word for great. And mega, we get that mega, isn't there a megalotron? Isn't that some big monster thing or something? But that's, it's big, loud, overwhelming. So Jesus is not whispering this out. When he does this, he screams it out. What he says, if you want to put that, yeah. Oh wait, that's past that. We can go back, because we got him dead there, yeah. Back one more, yeah. Jesus calls out, he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Eloi, Eloi is Aramaic. Lama sabachthani is Greek. I'm just going to say this about it. If someone was going to make up a story about a guy dying who's a hero, who ends up a hero, they're not going to create one of his statements to show him in weakness. Because if you're making up a heroic story, everything the hero says is something quotable, because he's a hero. This is not a statement that is heroic. What it is, it's a kind of a quote of the first verse of Psalm 22. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? We'll talk about that in a little bit, but it's understandable how the people standing around might misinterpret him, what he says, because Eloi is my God and Eli is Elijah. So you can see how they mistake that. And then he says lemak sabachthani, which is, and another thing, if they're gonna make up this story, they're not gonna have their hero say 4 words and them be in 2 different languages that aren't even close. They're going to make up some statement that he's going to say. First, it's going to be heroic. It's not going to say, why have you abandoned me, God, or Elijah, or whatever. And then they're not going to say it in a way that nobody knows what he's talking about, because if you speak Greek, you don't know what he said at the beginning, and if you speak Aramaic, unless you speak Greek, you don't know what he's talking about. They're not going to make this up. This has got all the marks of a difficult statement, which makes it probably true. Now, Jesus is not, even when he quotes the Greek, when he says, why have you forsaken me, or why have you abandoned me, this doesn't even exactly quote the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament. So that's even a little bit different there. The whole thing is just so peculiar. We haven't even gotten into what it means. Just the way that it's said, that it's almost 100% a given that this is exactly what he said. They heard it and they go, well, can you believe that's what he said? Because you're going to fix it. And when you're writing it down, if it doesn't make any sense. Nobody makes changes in something to make it more complicated. They always change it to make it make more sense. And so this is a strange moment when Jesus says this. And then it says, which means, my God, why have you abandoned me? And then next week, or in 2 weeks, we'll get into the business of they thought he was talking to Elijah and all that stuff. But here's the thing. I've had people ask me this recently. Did God really abandon Jesus? Did he really abandon him? Okay, here's the way people can look at it. It's not uncommon when Jewish rabbis were speaking about parts of the Bible, the Old Testament, in their discussions, they would quote a verse or 2 from something and expect you to think about the entire passage. Okay? You see what I'm saying? They give you the quote at the front end, and then you're supposed to go, oh yeah, that whole thing. Like if I go, what's it start? How's the Christmas story start? I can't remember the Christmas story. How's it start? What is it? No, 'twas the night before Christmas. No, I'm talking about the biblical story. That's okay. I know what you're saying. That's okay. I was talking like I forget how it starts. It starts talking about, and when it came time for Mary to be delivered. If I say that, you all know where we're going, don't you? Yeah, it came to pass when Mary was about to be delivered. Well, they're saying that when Jesus yells out, my God, why have you abandoned me? He wanted everybody to think Psalm 22. Now, if you read Psalm 22, it's awful at parts. Like, it's got lots of references throughout it that speak to the things that happened to Jesus during this horrible time of his passion. But they're also constantly in there, God is with me all the time, and God came along and he saved me. And it gets to the end and we're all supposed to praise God that he's always with us and we can count on him when things are terrible and he's there and all that. And so they say, Jesus yelled this one beginning of the psalm out because we're all supposed to go, he's thinking about how he's going to get saved in the next couple of days and God's going to be with him, and there's nothing wrong here at all. Jesus is just living in the moment because he's getting to the point of what? Getting saved by God, and God's going to prove that he never lets us down, even if it gets as terrible as getting crucified to death. You see what I'm saying? And so they say this statement by Jesus is a powerful, positive statement about his knowledge of his Father and what is coming, and he's going to the cross. He yells it out because it's a shout of victory. That's the Catholics are really strong on that one. It's an Orthodox position. There are people, evangelicals, a lot of guys that I read, that's what they're saying. And we've always missed the point of this because this is a shout of victory. But we have to assume that on Jesus' mind, at the time that he's on the cross, that he's thinking theologically. And he's thinking about the whole of the psalm. And he's thinking that everybody there is going to pick it up and that they're going to catch this, that he's yelling this out to the Romans who just crucified him, that God's going to win here. So don't you think that anything that's happening to me matters, because in the end, we already know what the end of the story is. That could be what it is. It can also be that Jesus is overwhelmed in agony. His speech is even altered by the situation that he's in. I had a professor, this is not even close to Jesus, but I had a professor. His name is Kevin Van Hooser, if you'd ever like to look him up, but he was maybe the most brilliant man on the planet, and I can't even understand anything he ever wrote. Fortunately, I could understand him when he talked, but he frequently, when frustrated, would fall into French. I'm just saying. When he wasn't happy about something and he'd be talking to me really fast, and all of a sudden I'd go, excuse me, Kevin, but I don't speak French. Now, that is, my point is, Jesus could have fallen into he could have said something in Aramaic and another couple words in Greek. He would have been schooled in the Septuagint. He didn't quote it perfectly, but he could have been so overwhelmed physically, and that this was a moment where God had to enact on his Son all of the penalty that we deserved for the sin of rebellion against him, and he feels the complete abandonment of God in the moment, because he's already been abandoned by whom? Everybody else. There's only one thing being left in the universe to abandon him now, because the people and the religious leaders and even the criminals have let him know that he's worthless to them. And now God himself turns his back on him just long enough for him to pay the penalty of our sin. That's another way to look at it. That's primarily the evangelical position, that Jesus was completely and totally abandoned. And he says, why have you abandoned me? And Jesus would have also known the answer to that question. The reason this is the only thing that he says, I believe, is because in Mark's gospel, he wanted his readers to get the point that Jesus only speaks one thing, and it speaks again to the great love that he had for us to take this. Does this make sense? Guys, I don't know which it is. I don't think it can be both. This cannot be a victory cry and a true abandonment of Jesus in the moment by God to death because of the sin that he has taken on himself. It can't be both. There is some aspect of victory in the cross. There is. But there's also great pathos in the abandonment of Jesus by his Father, even if it's just for a moment. I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what it looks like. It can't be both, but I can't answer the question. I want it to be the first one. But when I think about the complete dissonance between sinful mankind and the holy God of the universe, I can see why it might be the second. If that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, this is big stuff. The irony of it, again, there's been irony in all of these statements, is never has there been a person who lived on the planet who did not deserve the abandonment of God. No one else has it but Jesus. And the truth is, no one else has been abandoned by God. There is always the hope. Jesus alone, who did not deserve it, felt the full abandonment that we all deserve that God does not give us. I'm just saying that's big time. And it's ironic, but it's not like a literary thing. It's ironically, that's existential irony. But it also shows the willingness of the Father to go through this and the willingness of the Son to go through this because we are that valuable. Okay, let's stop there. I will see you in 2 weeks. I promise you, in 2 weeks, we will stop dealing with Jesus on the cross, okay? We'll at least get him into his tomb, okay? We'll stop with all the terribleness of the crucifixion. So, okay, I'll see you in 2 weeks.